So this was my childhood home, and yeah, it was where my parents had their first home and their first studio. So we were on the first floor, and then this is again the studio, but you can see how much work was just crammed in. And this is the work Frolic on a Nuclear Playground that we'll be exhibiting at Camden. This is where his last place was, and he lived for 30 years. It's on the top floor, and some of the work was so large you couldn't take it up to the flat. So Camden actually helped him by building a cupboard on, which might still be there, I don't know even if we can walk and see, but to store that painting. It was one autumn that the colours here were just so stunning and so striking, and my dad had his camera with him and just took shots of it. And I think I associate that period with those heath scenes. It was kind of he'd absorbed it. The very early watercolours were like that. They were naturalistic, conventional scenes. I spent years with my father, kind of observing him, watching him, listening to him, you know, but I would still, when I was growing up, I would still stop and look at certain paintings and think, how did he do that? How on earth did he do that? He was quite often astounded by the way his materials behaved. It just triggered this kind of constant desire to keep exploring, keep reinventing how he was working, and you know, and this was one of our favourite spots here. He had this, one of the most important milestones in his career really was this retrospective at the New Walk Museum in Leicester, and he got that exhibition really through the efforts of someone called Professor Patrick Boylan. The Leicester exhibition took place. Out of it emerged Patrick Boylan's interview he did with my father, and his, you know, trying to understand the experimentation with PVA. Let me take this out and have a look. Oh, wow. It's beautiful, isn't it? This is grey landscape. And what's beautiful about this, you can see the brush strokes of varnish on top of what was watercolour. This was a whole series, so he'd kind of finished with those very naturalistic scenes and started kind of entering the world of abstraction and these kind of imagined townscapes where really the main focus was on building up those skies. And these are all on the back of those laminated catalogues that he had ample stocks of. You know, he just kind of recycled to produce these remarkable scenes that you could hold in your hand, but yet contain such drama. He had that emotional connection to his heritage, and I think it was really kind of reinforced for me when he gave these talks at for the Commonwealth Institute, and you know, he kind of spoke about the inspiration behind his work and what had driven him artistically, but also how he'd come kind of, in his notes, he'd kind of come back to his Indian roots. So it was something that was part of his identity. The colonial presence in India and in Bombay was, you know, left its kind of psychological scar on a lot of people because they experienced firsthand discrimination, hatred, bias, prejudice. And I think my dad, being the person he was someone who would fight that. If anyone tried anything with him, and maybe it wasn't the wisest decision, but he would react and his temper would flare up. I want to say first thank you to London Borough of Camden for welcoming my father back, because that's essentially what we're doing with this exhibition. And I thought, let me just take you back to why we're revisiting a retrospective that was held in 1986. The opening took place on the 5th, it was Friday the 5th of December 1986. We were gathered in what was called the exhibition hall. It was actually the lobby of Swiss Cottage Library. And there hung my father's largest pieces. It was a big thing, you know, and there was a stage set outside, a PA system. Tony Banks had come to give a welcome talk. The Mayor of Camden was there, and the Indian High Commissioner. When he arrived in Britain in June 1962, within 2-3 months, he had around 15 exhibitions, half of which were in this area. And I think that's what I really love about kind of revisiting, you know, my dad's local history, because it tells me about how this borough was. So my father was born in Bombay, but our family came from Goa, and it was old Portuguese Goa in those times. And that's where our name comes from, Ribeiro. Just to give you a sense of how important my father's heritage was for him, arriving in Goa from Bombay by air is just 40 minutes. But as these minutes go by, the change in the landscape is staggering. The choked barrenness of the first 35 minutes give the feeling that whatever vegetation there is blisters and turns to the color of ash. And then, as if in the 36 minutes, you see Goa bursting from the lip of the Arabian Sea. The intense lights from a string of beaches, white, gold, and pale brown, is fringed with green coconut palms and red earth. It was this visual beauty that made the Portuguese hold on to Goa so doggedly. So he arrived in 1950 to Britain, and he said he spent 6 bitter winters in Britain, and those were his words. So it was in 1950 my father was sent to study accountancy. It seems only for around a month with his brother in Chalcot Square, in Chalk Farm. So in a sense, his roots to the area kind of started at that point. And then when he came, he was a teenager. He was still very young, was conscripted into the RAF. And when he went back to India, that was 1955. And I think within 3-4 years, he'd met my mother. And he decided, although he was doing really well in India, he decided to come back to Britain to to try and make it as a professional painter. There was this playfulness that was beginning to enter his language, and you can see that particularly with these free drawings, these kind of teetering rooftops, these kind of uninhabited streets, these kind of playful faces. And this drawing, if you get a chance to see it later, particularly in my mind, resonates with his Goan background. My father was probably best known for his experiments with his medium, and particularly with this substance called polyvinyl acetate, or PVA. It was roughly 1963, 64 that I found letters to 14 different UK manufacturers across the country. All of them were catering towards the industrial sector. Some were making hard plastics, some were making carpet backings, some were dealing with the furniture industry or the paper industry. And my dad was looking for the right medium, which he wanted to infuse with color and create his own palette. And these containers he sourced from a company called Geigy, which became Seba Geigy. And there's such high-strength dyes. With PVA, he could infuse these colors. And what he was finding is it was creating this whole new range of artistic effects. His artistic philosophy was, when I've perfected something, when I feel I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, I need to move on. When I look at these watercolors, I think of a quote where he had written to a friend of his saying, he was talking about the watercolors, and he said, they appeared to become my only mode of functioning. Remember, he'd moved into a small space, and that can be seen on this image here. It was a small attic space. So he said, they appeared to become my only mode of functioning. They gave me a lot of joy, were extremely relaxing, and perhaps levitational. And that is really important, because these works, as they go from the 1970s into the 1980s, actually behind the scenes, it was a very difficult time for my father. He suffered a racist attack in the 1980s. He had his exhibition at Swiss Cottage, and a painting was slashed. He had a heart attack. And a day before the exhibition was due to close, burst water pipes in his place. But the great thing is that after this period, again, my dad, ever restless, returned to working large scale. He's suddenly finding that actually he's revived, his work is being reappraised and being admired, and it fueled, his efforts even further.